Welcome back to the Break Free Podcast. I'm Ben, co-founder of the nonprofit Upsolve and host of this show. If you're new here, this podcast is all about helping you break free from financial stress, create financial joy. Now, I have a law degree and a lot of experience with personal finance, but I'm not a licensed attorney or financial advisor. This podcast is about sharing my journey and the tools that helped me. For specific advice, consult a qualified attorney or a financial advisor. All right, so in our last episode, we talked about my journey of breaking free from debt and achieving my American dream through Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Now, if you missed it, be sure to check it out on our channel. Today, we're diving deep into the pros and cons of the method that worked for me, Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Because there are lots of pros, but there are also cons, and understanding those will help you determine if it's right for you. So I'm going to break down the benefits. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that might make it not a good fit for you, and how to decide if it's the right path for you. So stick around for actionable advice and tips on how Upsolve can help you weigh these factors to make an informed decision. So for those who didn't hear the last episode, I want to start a little bit with my journey and how I evaluated the pros and cons of Chapter 7 bankruptcy. 9 years ago, I hit financial rock bottom. After my small business failed, I had $60,000 in credit card debt, and I was only making $20,000 a year. I tried everything to deal with that debt, but I could not get out. Some things I tried. Budgeting to the extreme, right? Like those of you who have struggled with debt might have heard about the Dave Ramsey method, where you have envelopes of cash, you only spend what's in those envelopes. And it didn't work for me because it was exhausting, it was joyless, and ultimately it was unsustainable. I tried Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which is a little bit different from Chapter 7. Without going into too much detail, Chapter 7 bankruptcy wipes out all dischargeable debt. Chapter 13 bankruptcy is a repayment plan that you negotiate with your creditors through the court, where you pay usually a little bit less than you owed. Problem was that the lawyer's fee was $1,300, which I didn't have to start that Chapter 13 bankruptcy. And the high monthly payments made it impossible for me, right? Like my goal was to move forward with my life. And one of the things that I believed I needed to do was to go back to school. I couldn't afford to go to school and continue to make big monthly interest payments through Chapter 13 bankruptcy or directly through those credit cards nonetheless. I also tried debt settlement. And the problem with that was I couldn't save the lump sums that I needed to settle my debts for less than I owed. So I tried debt consolidation. Problem with that was my score was too low. My credit score was too low for me to qualify for a loan that would actually save me any money. And after I tried all of that, I found Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It wasn't an easy decision for me, but learning about things like reaffirmation agreements, which allowed me to keep my car, and credit rebuilding after bankruptcy gave me the confidence to move forward. Because those were the two things I was really worried about, right? I was worried about the hit to my credit score because I knew at some point I was hoping I'd be able to get a home, hoping I wouldn't have to pay tons of money for my credit cards, things like that. So I didn't want to tank my score, and I was an Uber driver. I needed to keep my car, and I was worried that I might lose it. The great news was filing Chapter 7 wiped out my overwhelming credit card debt. It stopped creditor harassment and allowed me to start rebuilding my life. It was the right choice for me. And in this episode, we're going to help you figure out if it's the right choice for you, or at least how you could figure that out for yourself. So let's start by talking about the pros of filing Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Filing Chapter 7 offers significant benefits for people who are overwhelmed by debt. First of all, it eliminates most unsecured debts. Chapter 7 can discharge debts like credit card bills, medical expenses, and personal loans. Now, these are unsecured because they're not tied to property, as compared with secured loans, which you typically can't wipe out in bankruptcy. And that would be things like a mortgage, a car payment, something that's tied to property. So if you wipe out your unsecured debts, this means you're no longer legally required to pay those debts. Now, imagine the relief of no longer having to juggle minimum payments and late fees. It's like hitting a financial reset button. It was for me. So an example, if you owe $30,000 in credit card debt with high interest, filing Chapter 7 can erase that debt entirely. No more interest compounding every month. And then you can take that money and you can do what I did and you can invest it and you can earn interest, which means instead of paying the credit card company's interest that compounds over time, you can pay yourself interest, which helps you break free from that debt and move forward towards a greater level of financial security and joy. Now, an important note, certain debts like student loans or recent taxes aren't eligible for discharge in most cases. So if that's a primary concern for you, definitely encourage you to check out the Upsolve tool, figure out if bankruptcy is still a good fit or not. Next pro, bankruptcy is a really quick process. The entire Chapter 7 bankruptcy process typically only takes 3 to 6 months from start to finish. Like, I believe I filed in January and I was out of debt entirely in June. And that's a pretty typical case for most of the people that Upsolve works with. We've helped about 17,000 people get out of debt through bankruptcy, and that's about what we see as the average. So start to finish, 3 to 6 months, which is much faster than alternatives like Chapter 13 repayment plans, which can last 3 to 5 years. Now, why does that matter? If you're drowning in debt, a faster resolution means that you can move forward sooner. The less time you spend struggling with your money, the more time you can spend enjoying your money. And I find that happy people tend to be successful people. And so getting out of debt, moving forward quickly, means you can move towards that joy and that success much sooner. You're not tied to years of repayment plans or the stress of financial uncertainty. Another big pro is the automatic stay. And I talked about this in the last episode. As soon as you file, the court issues what's called an automatic stay. This immediately stops all collection activities, with a few exceptions, but it stops most collection activities. No more creditor phone calls, no more wage garnishment or threats of lawsuits related to your credit card debt. And that can feel so good. Like, that was one of the biggest things for me, that I no longer had to deal with that stress. Now, I remember the sense of release I felt when they stopped calling me. With bankruptcy, that can be something, as Upsolve users report, that is one of the best things early on post-filing bankruptcy. And so it's definitely worth considering as a pro. Now, it also stops, this automatic stay, it also stops foreclosure and eviction proceedings. So if that's something you're dealing with, I thankfully was not. I know a lot of people do. It gives you time to stabilize your financial situation and not lose housing if you're in an eviction proceeding. And that can be critical. So if you are struggling with housing issues, bankruptcy might be a way to get a little bit of breathing room while you sort out your finances. Now, another major pro is it's a total fresh start when you file Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It provides you an opportunity to rebuild your financial life from the ground up. If you're like me, you try, you're not getting ahead, all that work and energy is just going towards nothing. This gives you a reset button where the work and energy you put in can help move you towards financial joy instead of put you deeper into frustrating debt and discouragement. Once your debts are discharged, you can focus on creating a realistic budget for yourself. Instead of paying, 50, 60% of your income to credit card companies like I was, you can focus on building savings and working towards your long-term goals. For me, that fresh start allowed me to go back to school, which was so important. Like, I could not have afforded that when I was dealing with all this debt. And then it allowed me to co-found Upsolve and eventually to rebuild my financial life entirely to the point where, as I mentioned in the last episode, I am living my American dream today. I was making $20,000 just 9 years ago with $60,000 in debt. And now I own a beautiful home that I absolutely love. And you can do things like that as well when you move on from your debt. Next big thing is psychological relief. And I cannot overstate this. I've mentioned it a few times. Beyond the financial benefits, the emotional relief of no longer carrying overwhelming debt is life-changing. I believe that for many people, the only thing between them and achieving their American dream is shame. And overwhelming debt can be so shameful, right? Like, why can't I afford this? Why isn't what I'm doing with my money working? Is it me? And you start to pull that on, right? Like, you start to identify with that struggle. And you don't want to talk to friends and family about it. And so you can't ever get out of it. You just get stuck. And getting relief from your debt can help relieve that shame and put you in a position where you can move forward with joy. And like I said, I think joyful people are successful people. Now, another thing to remember is that rebuilding your credit when you file bankruptcy is actually possible. I was really scared about this. I had heard that filing bankruptcy, your credit tanks, that can make it hard to live your life in the future, especially if you want to, say, buy a car or get a home loan. The important thing to remember is it's not a permanent setback. It definitely wasn't for me. Many people rebuild their credit within a few years by maintaining good financial habits. Things like using a secured credit card responsibly, paying their bills on time, or keeping their utilization low. Now, I rebuilt my credit to over 700 within 2 years after I filed bankruptcy. And that's the case for many people, because for most people, right, like, you think about filing bankruptcy hurting your credit. If you've been struggling with debt for a long time, your credit's probably not already that great in the first place. And it is often a big boom that you experience after you file bankruptcy. For some people, it's not. Some people, their credit goes down. Mine went down a little bit and then it went up. But if you already have bad credit and you get rid of all this debt, the odds are good that your credit is going to increase relatively quickly. And that's what happens for many Upsolve users. Okay, a lot of pros, right? Bankruptcy sounding pretty good. Let's talk about the cons, because no decision, that considers just pros is going to be a smart decision. So let's jump into it. So while Chapter 7 bankruptcy can be a powerful tool, it's not without drawbacks. So let's dig into those. First of all, we talked about credit score. It can impact your credit score. Filing bankruptcy could significantly lower it if you have a high credit score now. And remember, the bankruptcy does stay on your credit report for up to 10 years. So what this means is you may find it harder to qualify for loans, credit cards, or housing in the immediate aftermath of filing. The good news is that many lenders are willing to work with you and give you time, to rebuild your credit. Time and consistent financial habits can reduce the negative impacts. And this is definitely the case for me. Actually, as soon as I filed, I think I got like 20 credit card notices in the mail to sign up for new credit cards within a week. So banks and credit card companies are interested in helping you rebuild that. Next con, non-dischargeable debts can be huge, right? The biggest debts most people have are their car loans and their home loans if they do have a car or a home. And those things can't be discharged in bankruptcy in most cases. So this would include things like I said, car loans, home loans, student loans. Now, there are some rare cases. Now, Upsolve can actually help you figure out if your student loans qualify, but generally speaking, they can't be included. Child support and alimony can't be discharged in bankruptcy, and certain taxes and debts from fraud, if that's something that's happened in the past, can't be discharged either. Now, Chapter 7 does clear most unsecured debts. However, it is important to understand what debts will remain, because that can determine, is this right for me, right? Like, should I do something else if most of my debt can't be discharged? And the Upsolve tools available at upsolve.org can help you figure out how your debt would be impacted by bankruptcy. Now, this is a big one. Another con is asset liquidation. So asset liquidation, crazy word, sounds terrifying. What is that? What that means is that if you have things that you own that are not covered by bankruptcy exemptions, which are laws that protect certain types of property, the trustee who handles your bankruptcy case might sell those things to repay your creditors. So don't worry, there are exemptions. It can cover many, if not most, of the things you own, and that's the case for most Upsolve users. So what are exemptions? Each state has laws determining what property is protected. Typically, this includes things like your car, parts of your home price, your personal belongings, up to a certain amount. Now, for me, I was terrified of losing my car, like I mentioned, right? Because I was an Uber driver. But I learned that reaffirmation agreements allowed me to keep my car as long as I continued making payments, which isn't an exemption per se, but it's a part of the bankruptcy process that if you work with Upsolve, we can help you, figure out, submit the forms for, etc. Another thing that sometimes keeps people from filing bankruptcy that is a major con are the eligibility requirements. It should go without saying, something this powerful, not everybody is eligible for it. To qualify for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you must pass something called the means test. Not the mean test, although I guess some people might feel it's mean if they don't pass it, the means test. This compares your income to your state's median income, and it considers allowable expenses. Another thing that could happen when you file bankruptcy is you could find out you don't pass the means test, meaning Chapter 7 bankruptcy just simply isn't available for you. And we can help you with that. It can be difficult to understand it, but tools like ours will make it easier for you to navigate. Now, if you don't qualify for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you may need to consider Chapter 13 or other options. Another con, and this is really maybe the biggest one, it was for me for a long time, is the emotional and social stigma around filing bankruptcy, right? Like bankruptcy for many people is a dirty word. I don't think it is anymore, but I definitely did at one point in my life. And so if you do, totally understandable. Bankruptcy carries a stigma that can feel kind of overwhelming, right? Like many people worry about judgment from their friends, their family, or their employers. The important thing to remember is that bankruptcy is not a failure. I want to say that again. Bankruptcy is not a failure. It's a legal tool that's designed to help people in difficult situations rebuild their lives. It was for me. I thought it was a failure for a long time. And the thing that really clicked for me was realizing, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm doing all the things you're supposed to do to live a successful financial life. It's just not working, right? Like I had some bad luck. I definitely made a few decisions that I shouldn't have made, but who hasn't, right? And I kept doing the things I should have done and it did not work. Like I did like the Dave Ramsey thing for forever, didn't have enough money to pay my interest, and so it didn't matter how hard I budgeted. And that can happen for a lot of people. And what shifted for me was I realized that bankruptcy could be a tool for responsible financial management where all other things had failed. And that shift from failure to responsible choice made a huge difference for me. Now, as you're weighing these pros and cons for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, it can be difficult, right? Like there's a lot of detail in there. What's exempt? What's not exempt? Are my debts even covered? I get that. It was a tricky thing for me to navigate, and that's why we created Upsolve. If you head over to upsolve.org and you launch the Get Free Debt Help button here, Upsolve can help guide you through the decision-making process with our free tools. You can think about these things as like TurboTax for how to get out of debt. It'll help you figure out if Chapter 7 is right for you, or if there are other options like debt settlement, debt consolidation, or a debt management plan that might be a better fit for you. We also have really helpful educational resources like the one that is really the source of information for this episode today. I've linked it in the show notes below. I am a show you, don't just tell you kind of guy. I want you to be able to look at it and learn for yourself. And we have lots and lots of articles like this in our Learning Center where you can learn more about bankruptcy and other debt relief options. We'll cover everything in this content from passing the means test to understanding those exemptions like I mentioned here. And we give you free filing assistance if you ultimately determine that you want to file. The tool will prepare your forms. It'll walk you through the process of submitting those forms for Chapter 7 bankruptcy and hopefully get you to that debt-free or debt-balanced point that you want to get to achieve a little bit more financial joy. The best part is we save you thousands of dollars in legal fees. The average Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing in America costs anywhere between $1,500 and $3,000. If you're like me, you didn't have that when you were dealing with debt. And doing it for free with a tool like Upsolve's, and it is entirely free, we are a nonprofit. It's quick and it can set you on the path to financial freedom at a low cost or no cost to you. Now, there are filing fees to filing bankruptcy. We'll talk a little bit more about that in future episodes, but many people actually are eligible for a fee waiver, which helps them avoid that fee as well. So bankruptcy has pros, it has a lot of cons, but it can be a very effective and very affordable way to break free from debt and start living your financial life. Okay, so in this episode, thanks again for joining. We talked about what bankruptcy is, we talked about its pros, we talked about its cons, and we shared some more information about where you can go to learn more about it. If this episode resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you, love engaging with you. Let us know if there's other things you want to hear about. If you have questions, anything at all we can do to help you on your financial journey, let us know in the comments or email us at breakfree@upsolve.org. And don't forget to tune in on Friday morning. This show drops Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays around 5 a.m. Eastern time. And this Friday morning, we're going to talk about how to get free legal support or legal aid for debt relief. Subscribe to the show. As I said, new episodes drop Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 a.m. Please share it with friends and family if you found it helpful. It helps the show grow and it helps spread financial joy to people who need it. Remember, no matter how overwhelming things feel in your life, there is a path forward. Until next time, I'm Ben, and I'll see you soon for another episode of Break Free.